Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Ware-Joseph, and I am the Chief Operations Officer for the Iliff School of Theology. And I want to welcome you to Iliff tonight. Some of you are people that are students or faculty or staff or alumni who are here. So for you, I'm saying welcome back. Some of you have been very much engaged with the Pulpit Plus Exchange since 2021. And I'm also saying to you, welcome back. And for those of you, this is the first time that you're here, I'm giving you a real genuine welcome because we are so glad that you're here to engage in this moment tonight, to work and grapple with a very significant question that sits in front of us right now. What happened, right? And religion and the election of 2024. I want to tell you some quick housekeeping things. You've already found the food. That's wonderful. Have as much as you like. In the end, if there's any food left over, we also have containers for you to take food home. We want you to always be well fed. Also, if you need to use the restroom while you're here, you'll go out this set of doors to the right, and you'll be able to find restrooms. And I also want to review with you something that was on the screen, but that you can also find on your tables now. It is a square that invites you to give to the Iliff School of Theology, and in particular, the Pulpit Plus Exchange, because you might have been able to see on one of the slides that this event is sponsored by a 5-year grant from the Lilly Foundation. But when the 5 years is up, then the money goes away. And we would like to continue to have these kinds of engagements and facilitations. So if this is something that sparked something in you that you find to be important and meaningful, please, I encourage you to give a gift to help support its continuation. I also want to give you another opportunity this evening. You're going to receive an email from me inviting you to complete a very brief survey, letting us know, giving us feedback on your experience tonight, because that also helps us to know what we need to do in the future to continue to develop these kinds of very critical and important facilitations, these meetings of the minds and the meetings of the spirits and the hearts, so that we can continue to be in a country where we are kind and we can care about each other and we are concerned for the welfare of all humanity across the world. The next person that you're going to hear from will introduce our speaker for tonight, but I want you all to continue eating and having wonderful conversations with one another, and then we'll begin the evening. Thanks again for coming.
Well, good evening again, everyone. For those of you who don't know, my name is John Hurst. I'm a third-year Master's of Divinity student here at the Iliff School of Theology. I also serve as the program assistant for the Congregational Connections program, which helps coordinate this Pulpit Plus exchange. So it is my pleasure this evening to introduce to some and present to others tonight's speaker. The Reverend Dr. Amanda Henderson is the director of the Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture at the Iliff School of Theology. In this role, Dr. Henderson leads research exploring the relationship between religion and politics. With a focus on informing public leaders, the Institute works for transformative action rooted in deep understanding. Dr. Henderson has her Ph.D. in religion, politics, and rhetoric from the University of Denver, prior to which she served for 7 years as the executive director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. She is also an ordained clergy in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Dr. Henderson also is the author of Holy Chaos, Creating Connections in Divisive Times. If you have not gotten that book, please go get the book. Can they get it on Amazon? Go on Amazon and get the book. It's apropos for this time, prophetic, if you will. And she also hosts the Complexified podcast. So please join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Amanda Henderson.
If I can get the recording of John's voice saying who I am and make that my alarm every morning when I wake up to remind me. Thank you all for being here tonight. Obviously, when I was asked to do this event on this evening, I knew that it would be the week following the election. What I didn't know was what in the world would have happened. So giving the title, What Just Happened, was a way of saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but at that time, we'll ask, what just happened? Because a few months ago, we thought that we could still be counting votes, or we thought that we could be in a moment of violent upheaval. We thought that we had no idea what to expect. And here we are. Almost a week after the election, when President Donald Trump was re-elected to office. How are you feeling? I'm an interactive person, so you can say your feelings out loud. We've got people online. Hello to all of you who are online. Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat and your questions along the way. How are you feeling? All the things. I hear all the things being said. Are you devastated? Disappointed? Numb? Happy? Nothing new. This is what we expected. This question is real, and it isn't one of judgment. There's obviously no one right way to feel in this moment. We feel how we feel. In the wake of an election, and really a decade of experiencing the American contradiction viscerally and physically, as many of us have been engaged in efforts of education and advocacy, marching, talking to our neighbors, talking to our friends, confronting the divisive and hateful rhetoric that has bent social norms and brought deep-seated truths to the surface. It seems expected that some might be heartbroken and disappointed. And most importantly, there are many here and across the United States who are feeling like they are in real danger in the wake of campaign promises of mass deportation, the silencing of opposition and elimination of health care for trans folks and women. There are real concerns about the future of higher education and education at every level. Some have said, well, we'll see. Trump is known for being hyperbolic and unpredictable, the very reason so many support him. Pundits on the left and the right debate the veracity of his words. Did he really mean it? Trying to read the tea leaves of people coming and going from Mar-a-Lago from day to day, while state governments and legal teams make plans to counter his most harmful promises. So here we are. Tonight, we gather here at Iliff School of Theology, one, to be together as a community, as friends, colleagues, to be together in person and online, to take time to reflect, to think, and to imagine. I invited you to write a few names, or a few words on your name tag of how you were feeling. I don't know if everybody got that memo. A lot of people said they didn't have enough room on their name tag, so they needed a bigger one, so we did put some note cards. But a part of that is because I do want to start with naming that these feelings are real. And tonight, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time there. We're going to move from our feeling brain to our thinking brain before closing in our acting brain. Now, I should state from the beginning that I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball or any clear agenda for us to, solve all the world's problems. So if that was your hope coming, I apologize in advance. But if you are here to get curious and to strategize, I hope we get there. So let's begin by doing a little review of the election results, in case you haven't read every article like I have. So obviously, Donald Trump won the Electoral College and for the first time won the popular vote. He improved on his 2020 performance in both red and blue states. Every swing state went for Trump. Colorado was one of the few that bucked the trend and moved slightly leftward. Black and Latino voters moved toward Donald Trump, and some of the most significant shifts were among men under age 45. One thing is clear: this is not an aberration, and it cannot be argued that people did not know who they were voting for. While there will be plenty of postmortems and countless analysis of these exit polls, one thing is clear. As those working to build more just societies where people are treated with care and respect and are all free to live in our interconnected communities, we have work to do. We are here at Iliff School of Theology because we have a particular interest as people from faith communities connected to this institution for theological education, committed to advocating freedom, committed to building up a new world, to educate leaders, to be prophetic voices, wise counselors, and compassionate companions, committed to bringing deep analysis of history, culture, ethics, scriptures, and traditions to the work of living together. With these foundational commitments, we're going to start with an analysis of a better understanding of how religion has shaped and continues to shape this political moment and our political future. So how does religion shape politics? Now, there's so many different paths we could go on, so we can do a lot of different lectures about the definition of religion and the forms of religion, but I'm going to focus here tonight on how religion is shaping electoral politics. So one of the ways that we explore that is some are through religious identity, religious values, the explicit evocation of religious authority, implicit assumptions about religion or motivation that religion drives, through religious-rooted organizing and advocacy, and religion shapes our worldview, which inherently shapes our politics. So we're going to get into each of these a little bit more. So religious identity. We know that religion is a source of belonging for many people. In a religious community, many of us find our people. So when sociologists look at religious identity and their research to develop polls such as this, they draw assumptions about a group based on their generalized set of beliefs and their patterns of behavior. We all know that there are wide variances within our religious identities, but still, when we're looking at voting patterns, we can seek to understand how beliefs and patterns of behavior play out in people's electoral choices. So these charts are from the Washington Post exit polls. You can find them there, and I can post the links in the email after if that's helpful. So in this election, Trump appears to have made gains among Christians as well as non-Christian people of faith. Trump's share of the Catholic vote increased by 10 points between 2020 and 2024. Trump's share of the Protestant or other Christian vote rose by 2 percentage points. Trump's share of the non-Christian religious vote between 2020 and 2024 that we see here rose by 4 percentage points. An interesting note is that according to exit polls, 78% of Jewish people voted for Kamala Harris, up 10% from their vote for Biden, despite some of the rhetoric leading up to the election, and bucking the national trend toward Trump. Non-Jews or Christians, which can constitute about 10% of the voting population, lowered their support for the Democrat for Harris from 69%, well, I guess the Democratic candidate, Biden or Harris, from 69% to 59%. So a couple quick slides, too, to cross in race and religion into these notes, and this has been talked about pretty thoroughly over the past week, that there was a move, as I just mentioned, for Black and Latino voters, particularly men, and Latino voters at large, toward Trump. The one place where that does not happen, Black women. 92% of Black women voted for Harris. And I think it's important to remember that a majority of white voters supported Trump. All non-white folks, aside from other, voted for Harris. All non-white folks, aside from other, voted for Harris. So these are realities and complexities that we need to be aware of. So as we look at religious identity as one factor to help us understand how people are voting, the next layer that I want to talk about is religious values. Now, what are religious values? This is something that is clearly contested, and we could have a lot of different discussion about what is a religious value. But there are some issues that are typically associated by those doing research as religious values. Of course, number one, people always talk about as abortion. So how did these play into the 2024 election? A lot of the talk in the lead up to the election was that abortion would drive voters to Harris, which did not play out. However, at the state level, in 7 states, including Colorado, Missouri, Montana, Arizona, Maryland, New York, and Nevada, referendums passed guaranteeing a statewide right to abortion. For the first time since Dobbs' decision overturning Roe versus Wade, there were referendums expanding abortion rights, or ensuring abortion rights rather, were voted down in Nebraska, Florida, and South Dakota. So that is kind of a mixed bag as people can pull that apart and say, how is religion playing out in the abortion debate? Another issue we might talk about as a religious value is welcoming the stranger. So many of this is something that really confounds us. How do people who are Christian continue to support someone who calls for mass deportation and uses slurs against immigrants? Well, it didn't fare well in this value of welcoming the stranger, clearly didn't fare well. 87% of Trump voters said that they support a policy of mass deportation of immigrants, 87%. Worker benefits is another. Faith workers and labor organizing from faith communities around worker rights is another value that we look at from a religious perspective. So in this past election, Alaska raised the minimum wage and required employers to provide sick leave. Arizona declined to reduce the minimum wage for tipped workers. Massachusetts increased the minimum wage for tip workers. So we saw debates and conversation, while on one hand there's this overarching conversation about the economy at the state level, the votes didn't play out in continually supporting workers. Some other values that are on the table right now that are going to continue to be debated, and religion will have a role. One is around education, as we look at religious curriculums moving into public schools, and we look at public funding for religious schools. That was on the ballot here in Colorado and lost. That was the choice in education, which would have given a mandate for people to be able to, or a right rather, for people to be able to choose private school, even if it was private religious school, which was thought to violate the separation of church and state. Other values that we saw throughout this election, one was Project 2025. Who heard about Project 2025 through this election? So Project 2025 was the 900-page laying out of a full agenda for the Trump administration to be able to hit the ground on day one, implementing a sweeping vision of the United States, which would be a radical change from where we're at, implementing many explicitly Christian ideas and structures into our political system. This was shouted from the rooftops by many progressive folks, and it did not sway the vote. Outside of specific issues that were on the ballot measure or up for the election, we know that LGBTQ folks, and specifically trans rights and equality, was an issue that was was a tool of hyper-scapegoating, as trans folks and affirmation of care for trans kids and trans athletes became an effective refrain for Trump supporters. Other values that we could talk about, you all probably each could name a few of your core values that are driven by your own religious convictions. We might talk about the environment. Are we for extraction or conservation? We might talk about Israel and Palestine and Gaza and our international commitments. We might talk about the economy, inflation, taxes, social safety nets. We might talk about religious freedom, free speech. Each of these issues, of course, are a part of the ecosystem. But when it comes to the way people voted, we see that those values were not focused on the things that we would typically associate, as many of us in this room, with religious. So a couple of more of the exit polls and tying these to values. So as in the exit polls, as people looked at and said what was most important to them, we see the economy. Well, actually, we see immigration as the most important thing for those who voted for Trump. We see the economy as number 2 and foreign policy as number 3. For progressive voters who voted for Harris, I guess I should just say, for voters who voted for Harris, the state of democracy was stated as number 1, and then abortion as number 2. So these are the religious ideas and values that are often, sometimes explicit, when people will say, I am a Christian, so this is my political belief. We have people who are calling upon implicit values. And then we have the explicit evoking of religious authority that we saw during this presidential election. And so this is something that I'll be continuing to watch, how explicit evocation of religious authority is used and called upon, exploited, if you will. We saw during this election the threat of white Christian nationalism, which is a political movement that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civil and political life. And this threat of white Christian nationalism was shouted again by the rooftops and did not move the needle for voters. At the same time, we saw Trump's language claiming himself as divinely appointed. If you saw his acceptance speech on the night of the election, he said, and I quote, "Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason, and that reason was to save our country and restore America to greatness." Not going to try his voice or anything. Trump has pledged support for evangelical priorities and a pushback on transgender rights. Many people at Trump rallies wear shirts proclaiming Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president. We also know that there are many things that are already in motion that impact religion and the separation of church and state that Trump has already vowed to support, like the new Louisiana law posting the 10 Commandments in public schools, or the Oklahoma education official that ordered for public schools to incorporate the Bible into lessons, and not just any Bible, but a specific description that only the Trump Bible fit. And each of these are now expected to go unchallenged. In the 2024 Republican platform, there was a pledge to use, quote, "existing federal law to keep foreign Christian-hating communists, Marxists, and socialists, as well as jihadists, out of America." And on the campaign trail, Trump said that he would form a federal task force to fight for the persecution against Christians in America. So sorry if you were hoping to come for an uplifting evening after all of these. We also saw from progressive movements the explicit evoking of faith and Christianity and interfaith. There were several progressive religious organizations, such as Vote the Common Good, Faith in Public Life, Interfaith Alliance, and Faith Leaders for America gathered signatures of 1,000 faith leaders for Kamala. Kamala Harris visited black churches in Atlanta in the final weeks of her campaign, and that constituent was very strong for her. So the evoking of religious authority is very particular in the Trump world, but it is also seen across the religious spectrum. Again, not in the same ways, but there are ways that people evoke religion across the spectrum. So when voters were asked what qualities mattered most, they don't ask his, proclaiming Christianity, but they do ask things like his ability to, has the ability to lead. So 66% of Trump voters said that it was because of his ability to lead. 74% said can bring needed change. This is a really interesting one, I think. Cares about people like me. That was not something that Trump voters cared about. Harris voters wanted someone who cares about people like them, but Trump voters, that was not important to them. Has good judgment. Judgment was not a priority. The priorities are can bring change and has the ability to lead. So we ask again, what just happened? As we look at those are the facts on the ground. And I think it's really important for us to look at those clearly and to take that time to have clear-eyed vision. And to ask, why did more voters in this election support a candidate who has been twice impeached, convicted of sexual assault, convicted of committing 34 felonies while in office, blatantly lies, demeans, and divides? What is going on? Some might say, well, of course, racism, sexism, patriarchy. End of story. And while this is obviously a factor, I want to argue that racism, sexism, and patriarchy are tools rather than causes, and that we are invited in this time to reflect and move beyond a simple dismissing of racism, sexism, patriarchy, white supremacy, Christian supremacy, with a pastoral realization that furthering to beat that drum isn't working. And furthering patterns of shame isn't working. And so we need to be able to do a few things at once. We must see clearly the real potential impacts and dangers of this second Trump presidency, while not becoming paralyzed in anger and fear. One of the things that I've been sitting with over this past week, and even before, listening to all of the things that I listen to far too much, my family will tell you, is this dilemma that Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party faced in general in this election as the incumbent, arguing for stability, arguing for a return to normalcy. But the problem is that normalcy is inherently bound up with the status quo. And we know that the status quo is not working for most people. We can argue about why the system doesn't work. I can say that it's because it's rooted in racism, patriarchy, wealth inequality, greed, and corruption. But in the end, something that unifies right and left is a feeling that the way things are is broken. So when Democrats are arguing for stability, fighting the upheaval of Trump, they are falling into supporting the system as it is, which is not working no matter who you are. Trump uses scapegoating and dog whistles to blame the broken system on the other, the invader, the alien, the enemy, which distracts from the real culprits of the broken system. We know this. Trump uses religion to claim moral authority and to merge patriotism with godliness. And so we're in a bind, because the more we shout that the real culprits are racism, sexism, and greed, the less we are able to break through and to create and imagine the world as it can be. Now, please don't mishear this. It feels like a scary thing to say that we need to understand racism, sexism, and patriarchy, and we also need to think beyond this and how we are trying to address our bigger social problems. This doesn't mean that those issues don't exist and aren't a real and clear present danger. It means that by singularly focusing on them, we're giving too much of our oxygen and our thinking power, and we're neglecting the work of reimagining and rebuilding, imagining and building. We must do both. We must both counter the harmful effects of this Trump presidency, and we must take some time to think and imagine and work together to build systems that work for all people. So in this next piece, I want to invite us to move into our thinking and imagination brain. And I know that's a hard thing to do when we are still feeling in our feels. And so if we can't get there, that's okay, but this is what I want to invite us into. I have some little case studies profiles of different voters. Some voted for Trump, some voted for Harris. Some talk about their conflict, their conflicted feelings about it. And I want us to ask some questions to seek to understand, identify, and respond to what are the underlying needs and desires. When we go back, I'm going to flip back to this. This slide is very interesting to me because we've just gone through all the litany of horrible things that Trump has said and done, that we know that these aren't mysteries. And yet voters, which is our society, who we cannot dismiss, especially if we're going to actually effectively make change politically, prioritize, can bring needed change. There is this idea that people would rather blow up the system than actually think about what is causing the system to be problematic in the first place. Just tear it all down. There's the desire to have someone who is just going to take the wheel and lead, rather than people who are, then they care about like me, that they identify with, that they care. That's not prioritized. What is going on here? So by looking at these profiles, and we're going to put some up for those who are online. Matthew David's going to share a couple. If you all want to come up, I've got some here at the table, and they're going to hand them out, our awesome Iliff students and team. And I want to invite you at your tables to pick a profile or two and to ask this series of questions after you read these folks' statements. All right? Does that make sense to everybody? So you're going to do this at your table. You can choose one. You can just pass them out randomly, y'all. I know they're in little packets, so maybe pass a couple of the big ones and a couple of the small ones at each table. You can choose which of the voters that you want to reflect about. And if you want to do this on your own, you can do it on your own. If you want to do it as a group, you can do it as a group. If you want to find a partner, we got lots of flexibility. All right, are you all ready? Okay, go. You've got 7 minutes. No, correct. Yeah, they're all, I know. Yeah. All right, one more minute and start wrapping it up. And then be prepared, I'm going to invite folks to share about your analysis. And those of you online, I invite you to type in your responses. We've got one, we want more. We're inviting you to think. Yes, exactly. All right. If you would like to bravely share your processing and reflections about your profile, about your person, you can find one of the microphones. There's a green microphone right here, a yellow microphone over there. Pick one. Who's up first? Who's brave? I know we've got people who know how to speak here. Oh, this is perfect. This is my daughter, Mia.
I was voluntold to be a speaker. So one thing we noticed of like...
Who was your person?
We looked at... We looked at June Carey, the artist, self-employed artist.
Perfect. That's the one that people online had, so
Sweet.
perfect.
And Luis Oliveira. That's
Okay.
the business owner in Nevada from Brazil.
Great.
So our underlying needs we identified as, I think, a concept of scarcity that Trump, we think, like, preys upon, of like he supports this concept that there's like a zero-sum mentality, that there's constant scarcity, and that you prioritize the individual above the community. He shows he does that. You should do it. You should put yourself first. And then talked about like greater economic needs and the like of late-stage capitalism, and that now that capitalism isn't supporting white folks anymore, there's the people of color who used to be the base of the support for white folks in capitalism now become the scapegoat. It's your fault why capitalism isn't working for me anymore. I need someone who's going to make capitalism work for white people again, instead of actually changing the system of harm and creating a new one. We talked about classism and wealth inequality. Okay, and then religious and theological frameworks talked about Jesus and welfare.
Say more about that.
A lot of what Jesus did would have been considered welfare. And the woman who said she'd been on welfare talked about how she believed it kept people in the cycle of being dependent on it. So we talked about a lot of what Jesus did was welfare. Talked about, we have some lovely Iliff professors at our table. So we talked about where references to capitalism are in the Bible, and although capitalism didn't fully exist yet, early capitalism in the Roman Empire is talked a lot about. Industrialization of agriculture is talked a lot about, and so that was our religious talk.
Awesome.
Alternative, different, reform to our economic system.
Reform our economic system. There's
Or
our
just a new
imagination
one.
future. Awesome. Thank you. Good job, Mia. All right, come on up, and will you share your name before you start? Not yet, but we will.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
There we go. My name's Dave. I'm going to do my best to represent the consensus as we struggled to form one from the back corner table here.
Perfect.
So we also had June Carey, our 70-year-old artist from Chico, California. And we got pretty solid answers on the first three, but that was as far as we got. So the needs that we came up with were obviously financial, right? But as we unpacked the money part, we got into really autonomy. And the autonomy is hidden in there in terms of welfare. And some of the other people at my table were very knowledgeable about how welfare really winds up entrapping and reducing your ability to make choice. For example, one of the things is your food selections are really nailed down for you. You don't have that kind of autonomy. And autonomy's next adjacent factor would be security, right? She's 70 years old. She's barely making it on welfare, right? So those three things were kind of the iron triangle that at least I recorded as the needs: financial, autonomy, and security, right? And then we start talking about how is the system functioning, again, with welfare, entrapment, right? How do you break free of this? Again, as we discussed, welfare it's really hard to break out of that sort of system once you're in there. But there was discussion at the table, and please, table, tell me if I'm getting this right, that the, Trump offered freedom, right? We're going to burn it all down. You're going to be set free. You're going to be liberated. Even if you're a 70-year-old artist living on Social Security in California, we'll make it better for you. Number three, the religious frameworks, and I'm out of my depth here, but I'm going to say that it was really, Jesus has big two, and it was the second one. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Care for the others was where we'd kind of got to. And the last two, we ran out of time, 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was how I would describe it. I'm not sure if any of my table mates would have anything else to add, but that was the back corner's perspective.
Thank you. Good job, Dave. Matthew, David, do you want to share one from online?
Sure, yeah, there's been some conversation online between a couple of people. Again, we had the same case studies that were first spoken about. And regarding June, who is the first person, someone just named, Johanna in Lakewood named that these are like basic needs. I think it was framed slightly differently earlier, but like being able to survive felt kind of essential. And boy, they're flooding in now. This is great. Someone said, and I've asked for clarity and I haven't gotten it yet, but that this is also something like the Judas effect, which I don't know what that means. So I'm super curious. I'm hoping Chuckles 1856, if you'd like to follow up with clarifying that, that'd be great. But yeah, there's a lot going on, so.
Yeah.
That's about where I can leave it.
There's this common theme, though, of hearing, and it's fun that so many people have chosen her as the avatar person, the person who voted for Trump, that there's a desire for enough, for economic stability, security, autonomy, to be cared for, that we can identify these underlying needs. How they voted, we can, ask, like, how did they get from here to there? And that's something I think that we should continue to ask, but keeping asking this, like, what is happening here and how is the system that we want to burn down? We can all agree that the system is broken, but what is it about the system that is keeping people feeling like they don't have enough or aren't safe? Other folks want to jump up and share. We probably have time for one more. I know there's someone who wants to. No? I know you all are chatty, but you're being shy. How about one of our Iliff students back there? I'm going to volunteer one of you all to. They all start looking at each other. Oh, Josh. Good job, Josh.
I'm going to try to remember, it's finals week, the mind is everywhere. So try to remember and represent our table in a decent manner. But our case study was Ben, forgive more? More. Ben. So Ben is a 38-year-old truck driver, and a lot of his base or underlying needs, we focus a lot on the child care aspect. He was expecting a second child, and they talked a lot about inflation, and so we chatted a lot about the needs for how childcare and assistance in today's world, if two people are working or not working, like how much of that's essential. And then we did talk about how creative responses to that, about how some homes, nursing homes, and at the end of life care, I think is how we were talking about how some of these needs could be collectively, where like some of the elderly homes could help with childcare and newborns, but like how our country's very individualistic and how we've emphasized individualism so much that like we need finances in childcare and pay where that's no longer met from the village. There's no longer a village mentality, so a lot of this underlying need of, like, that's like a big part of someone's reasons for voting is like, oh, the economy, inflation, these are impacting my home and my household, which, yeah, I mean, they're reasonable, like, right? Like, I need my child, we need 2 workers, or we need 2 incomes in today's economy to be able to support things that used to be so much more affordable with single incomes or with less money. How's the system functioning? That was tied into a lot of what we were talking about the second one, how we're getting let down by a system that's no longer valuing a family or like a multifamily dynamic to be able to take care of your people and your communities. And the religious and theological framework, I don't think we got there very much, but
It's a common theme in this room.
but
I keep skipping that one.
but yeah, so I think that was the majority of what we focused on. For those
Wonderful.
answers.
Thanks, Josh.
So yeah, you're welcome.
So I want to invite you, when you get home in the next week, when we send a follow-up email, I'm going to get a link to John to send you that has more of these profiles. And I just want you to start trying to read and listen and think with a new lens that asks, what is actually happening here? What are the underlying, peel back, peel back, peel back. What are people actually longing for when they say the system isn't working for them? What are they longing for? And how have our current structures perpetuated this broken system? And then that final step that is what we need to spend more and more time on, imagining and creating systems that work for more people, for all people. And I think that something that I ask as Iliff School of Theology, and that I invite those of you who are in faith communities to ask, is what do religious folks uniquely bring to these needs in our society, in our community, as we are imagining new ways to live together? What are the needs, and what are we uniquely prepared to do in the face of the needs of our communities? So this final piece, before we do some Q&A, is this: how do we act? What can we do? And we have moved through this progression tonight of feeling. We got to feel the feels. We feel the feels. We just do. And then we need to think. And we need to think beyond simple blame, knowing, yes, racism is real, sexism, patriarchy, wealth inequality, these are realities we are living within. How are we going to change those? We are going to change those by imagining new paths forward. Calling them out is, we have done that education effort. We need to imagine new paths. That is far harder than saying, burn the house down, blow up the system. That is the long haul commitment. is imagining new paths forward, and not just imagining, but acting to build those. So some of the ways I want to suggest, these are just some ideas for you to put in your hopper. There are cards on your tables and pens. You might have notes. I want to invite you to think about one thing that you can do that's a part of imagining and building up that new world, while simultaneously standing with our neighbors, defending ourselves, those who are most at harm. We know those days are going to come. We can't neglect the imagining and the building up out of our fear and becoming paralyzed. We have to both identify legal frameworks and policies, stop mass deportation, assure that LGBTQ folks have healthcare access, that women have healthcare access, that our education is happening for our young people. We need to engage in local politics. This is a place where, across the board, I named those different ways that state initiatives were a lot more convoluted, complex than what we see in the national political scene, because we're talking to real people when we're working in, I mean, everybody's real people. We're talking to our neighbors and our friends and caring for those who are around us when we engage in local political spaces, building relationships, build community in your own neighborhood, Trump voters, Harris voters, all in between. Engage on a specific issue. If there's something you're really passionate about, so many of us are very much locked in like a fight framework. I invite you to move into imagination. On that issue that you care most about, what does it look like to imagine alternative pathways? Be in solidarity with those who are most impacted. We have to be on defense and offense. So that is the, oops, wrong clicker. The bulk of what I want to say tonight. We have about 30 minutes, which is a good amount of time, for questions and answer, for deeper discussion into this. So bring it all. I do want to plug again our Complexified podcast. We had Miguel de la Torre, our professor here from Iliff, on Friday, and it was embracing hopelessness about the election. You don't want to miss it. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to the Complexified podcast. So, all right, questions and answers. Well, questions. Great, thanks, Dave.
Yeah, back again. Can you back up one slide, please?
Yep.
So the thing that caught me out was in your first bullet there, you talk about legal frameworks. Is there a reason you narrowed it to only legal frameworks? And let me unpack that for a sec.
Yeah.
You know, I picked my top three, and my one issue that really moves me is climate change. And I figure it's a non-starter in the legal framework, right? The Department of Energy and all those folks are going to go the way they're going to go. But I think I've got other alternatives, right? The viability of EV, the viability of solar. There's financial things that can go that aren't a legal frameworks. And can you comment if there's a reason you narrowed it to a legal framework, or can I expand my thinking like it's going to be money that really drives everything and working that angle?
You can do whatever you want, and I love that. So I'm just was thinking of specific ideas, but absolutely think about all of the different ways that we can confront and address the issues that we're going to see, and climate is a really important one that I know my daughter, for one, and so many people are extremely concerned about the policies that are going to come out. How do we confront that on other planes, not just legal frameworks? But there's no particular reason. It was just the word that came to my head.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, come on up to a microphone. Great question. So I love that. So like thinking we need more places where we are focused on imagining, right? And so if you are excited or if you care passionately about environment, pull together a group that is, let's imagine new paths. Let's read a book and then engage our imagination. We tend to focus on the problem and not engage that creative part of our mind to think about different paths forward. And I think that we are there. We have no alternative. We have to start imagining different pathways, which is really hard when we are stuck in our fear, anger, blame brain. Yes, Beth, come on up to a mic.
Hi, Amanda. It's nice to see you. I'm Beth Ertz, and I'll say this. I go to First Plymouth Congregational Church, not too far from here. Eric Smith here is our teaching minister. He teaches us a lot. But about climate crisis, I would like to say this. I think there are paths that have already been created in many progressive churches about the climate crisis. But there aren't enough people left in mainline Christianity to move that agenda forward. And so I guess my question would be, how do we get people who haven't been churched, who aren't interested in belonging to a church, to Mia, who comes to our church and has, and how do they engage with us? Because when we hear from people your age, we know that there's something to be done out there. And we're solid. It's a solid ministry at our church. And it is across, Most Precious Blood, the Catholic church up the street, they've engaged with us in our Creation Justice Fair that, this is Sophia. I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer your call. I'll call her back.
Sophia's an Iliff student and a pastor at First Plymouth.
Oh, I've talked to her twice already today. Her mother is better, but still not out of the woods, I would say. If you need more information, I'll share it. But I just think that there's so much there already. I was the one who commented about my experience in long-term care over my entire career, that in innovative communities, we developed childcare inside the community for the worker there. They could leave their child there all day. They could come and breastfeed as a new mom, and grandmas would be rocking them. And you knew who they were. You took care of them. And there's places like that all over the United States. And so I think there's these places already, this innovation that's going on, that we as members of our community have a responsibility to engage in and not try to recreate, but to join what's already going on. And that's all I'll say.
I love it. Yes, so wonderful. And I think that, one, you named a dilemma there and a real opportunity. So first, yes, there are so many people doing incredible work. So if you're passionate about something, find your people and stay connected and mobilized. We also have a real crisis right now in our country of engagement, and people are more disconnected. They are less likely to go to a church community or any sort of gathering where they're connecting with other people. And so, this is also it. Rather than just resigning and being frustrated about it, which I'm not saying any of us here are, but that's an option, that we have to keep pushing and keep going out and keep trying to connect in different places and different spaces. And people aren't always going to come to us who have a great idea and are doing something good. It often takes bringing it out and thinking about how to make it happen in new ways or how to reach new folks. And I know that you all are doing that so much, and so many here are, but staying encouraged, keeping going to find those people and engage, because it's so easy to check out right now and just expect someone else to fix it. Right? So you have to engage. Matthew David has one online, and then we've got you here.
I've actually thrown it out there to people online, and I'm waiting for a question, but I have a question.
Great, perfect.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
I love framing things in terms of imagination. And one thing that I'm wondering is how you think about imagining with another person who doesn't identify the problem that you've identified. Or in the case of what was shared earlier about the religious communities or people who are like the large percentage of nuns that you saw up on that screen, which were called unchurched, right? But regardless of terminology, for people who are inside of a faith community and people who are, for whatever reason, not participating, that's another piece of difference, even if there's similarity in our political views. So how do you imagine with people whose imagination is framed so differently than your own?
Yeah, great question. So I think I would peel it back, and that we aren't always, yes, there are times, especially when we are with like-minded folks, that we are imagining a solution together with like-minded folks. But there's also a way of engaging imagination to communicate with that person who does not see the problem the same way you do, and to come at that question from a different angle so that you can better understand what's under how they view the problem, and to continue to imaginatively dig to find some semblance of a connection. That doesn't, I don't mean that in a Pollyanna, like we're all gonna find our common, we're the same, but even engaging imagination and how to build a relationship with someone who has a radically different worldview than you. This is one of our most challenging problems right now. This is something we have to imaginatively approach. How do we find a way to live together with someone who doesn't see the problem the same way we do? So, in that question, I think there's two pieces. There's the imagination that happens when you're solving a problem together with like-minded folks, and there's the imagination that's needed to maintain a relationship with someone who doesn't even see the problem or doesn't see the problem in the same way. Does that make sense? It's hard.
It does. And I think one of the things that it's occurring to me now is that some of us are the problem that's been identified. And in which case, like, how do you, like, perhaps not everyone is called into that conversation to basically
Absolutely.
dig into the imagination to convince someone of your own dignity.
And it might not be convincing them of your own dignity. It's just being with them in the same room, and they come to see that you are a person. And so it doesn't have to be changing their mind. And if you don't feel safe, anyone, if you don't feel safe in that space with that person, that is not your role or place. And so we're always navigating these spaces with figuring out how to be here with this person in this context. So yeah, I think that that's not everyone's job to change someone's mind, and I think that I can very much be in a room with someone and have no desire to change their mind, but know that my own being there is enough to show that I am human and I exist. Yes, will you head up to a microphone for our folks online? Is that possible? Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I'm Bev, and I'm a member of First Plymouth, and we're well represented here today. Is it Matthew David? Yes. Yeah, he mentioned imagination framed differently. Well, what about what we collectively might call misinformation? I mean, you can talk about framing something differently, but when it's wrong or false, and there's been this, 40 years of ongoing misinformation, really, and that twist that has just appealed to the demographic of under 45 male, primarily. How do we deal with that? I mean, patience and listening can only go so far. So I don't know, what are your thoughts? And the other folks, I'm curious.
Yeah, if anybody has a perfect answer, let me know. I think that one of the things I would say is that's that offense and defense. and trying to hold both places. If there, and there's so much out there about how to combat misinformation. So and none of it works perfectly. We are in a whole new world. We don't have answers to this yet. We now have AI-generated voices and people, and we are in a whole new world. And so it's going to take all of us thinking creatively, and I don't mean that in a small way. I mean that in a big way. What is the alternative? Throwing in the towel. We can't do that. And so it's engaging, it's, stepping in, reading, thinking, trying to identify ways to counter misinformation. But there is no easy way to counter misinformation. And if people are, one of the things that, and I think we could get into tools around, asking a different question, or just ignoring the disinformation and misinformation and coming at it from, tell me about your kids and your needs around childcare. And so, a lot of times that misinformation and disinformation becomes the whole goal is for us to pay attention to it so that we won't pay attention to the real things that matter. But sometimes you have to pay attention to it. And so this isn't a, formula for encountering misinformation, but it's something to be aware of. Is this a distraction that is keeping me from the things that actually are important? Or is this something that has to be addressed? This is a discernment. Yeah, Harold.
Hello, everyone. My name is Harold Fields, and I'd like to make a comment about one of the questions you asked. You talked about for 40 years something's been going on. 40 years is just a drop in the bucket for humanity's sense of self. I think we have to recognize that one of the barriers to us being creative in our thinking has been the values that we live with and that we take for granted that we're going to have to face. And that is, we have deep values about separation and hierarchy. And that we have, we define ourselves as being different from the other, whoever that is. And with the hierarchy, we have one sex over another, we have one race over another, we have one church or one religion over another, we have one country over another. So by default, we've been trained to think about creating solutions by creating a new hierarchy. That won't work, and we're going to have to get out of that. So one of the things that we have to begin to think differently in terms of how of networking and the interconnection, more quantum physics as opposed to Newtonian physics. How something that I do here can affect something in Brazil or some other place. But I would recommend and suggest that we learn something from the indigenous cultures, because they have had the opportunity to stay close to what the humanity is that will take us forward. And I would recommend that you might take a look at something like Afrofuturism. Mm-hmm. Writers who write about things because they have lived through some of the worst times. Some of my ancestors and the songs that we sang that got us through the spirituals and those kind of things. But the writings and how we would take the traditional Christian values and flip them on their head to send messages to each other that the master couldn't understand and couldn't see. So I think a lot of the indigenous cultures and writers like Octavia Butler and areas of science fiction. These are people who are thinking out of the box and thinking, and you have to expose yourself to that. That's one way to kind of catch the wave. And I always appreciate Grace Lee Boggs, who talks about, you know, all of us can't be the great thinkers. Some of us are going to have to do the defense, and some of us are going to have to kind of step back and start trying to imagine and find each other and do something very different. But I don't think we all have to sign up to do everything. And if you're willing to get wild, this is the time to do it.
Thank you, Harold. We can clap for that. And I just want to name like the wisdom among us and wisdom of those who have lived through multiple iterations of the American contradiction in our day-to-day realities. That is something that is a foundational piece to be able to engage in that critical thinking and imaginative thinking and moving outside of just simple blame, shame, and checking out. Yes. Thank you, Harold, again. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for having us here tonight. It's been fantastic. My name's Elaine Borton, and I'm a member at First Plymouth UCC. In some earlier conversations when we're speaking about how do we listen and hear and understand someone who is coming to the world, to our world in a very different perspective, this is definitely a plug, but it's a tool and it's a resource that I feel very strongly about. And if any of you can talk about it within your churches, the Rocky Mountain Public Media Group, which is the owner of all Rocky Mountain Public Television, public broadcasting, has put together a statewide initiative called Above the Noise. And they're working with the Colorado Press Association, the Colorado Media Project, and CSU, and they have a lot of research that's been put into this process. And they have created a film called Undivide Us. And if you have an opportunity to look at it individually, to bring that film to your congregations, it was so wonderful to be a part of that, to see how it is possible to walk in someone else's shoes. You don't agree with them, but you can respect them, you can hear them, and who doesn't want to be heard? So it's a really wonderful, wonderful statewide initiative that's being looked at a national level. And again, I think I'm singing to the choir, so I can say these things, but I'm making a guess that maybe many of us enjoy listening to public radio, and that is going to be on the chopping block. So just keep all of that in mind, but I do think that the resources, and they have a toolkit as well that goes into some wonderful expressions of how to overcome the feelings and then how to create community from people with very, very different opinions of our own. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, John.
I wanted to respond to Dr. Fields. I thought that was great.
He's going to sing, so he's...
I just want to offer another thing. We are imagining. I get it. Yes, so let's imagine us all working together. But what do we say to many younger black folks who would say, Dr. Fields, you don't be telling our secrets? That we are trying to come together, who are skeptical of good white people and have been for 400 years. So what do we, so it's this thing, yes, Afrofuturism, Octavia Butler, all of those things, those are those spirituals. These are secrets of how we have made it through. But I just want to be careful that the work does first start with you before we start then going to just appropriate more resources and continue the same thing. And I think that's what I have worried about, not just this week, but always. When we talk about sometimes if we don't have the skills to imagine, or the tools to imagine, really what we're not doing is imagining. We are just then doing the same thing of stealing and appropriating. So I just want to offer that here, and not as a pushback, but just as another voice about that. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Yeah, come on up. And Harold's not angry. He's got to go to his spirituals project singing. Just so
I know the spiritual projects.
He might be angry, but I don't think that's why he's leaving.
You know, as I come here, I think of a former professor, Vincent Harding. And one of his things was, is America possible? And it had something to do with what Harold was saying. We tell an awful lot of stories about who we are and how we got to be there. How many of you know what Bacon's Rebellion is? Interesting. Bacon's Rebellion. You know, it had to do with the first divide of our country, before slaves. And these people got together who were indigenous servants and poor whites and blacks and had a rebellion. And after that, we had this law and this new name that came up that divided people called race. And so as we talk about race, my question is to the church, and I keep asking ministers, exactly when did God create race? Because we talk about it like it's real. Racism is real, race is not. Race came from colonization, dividing this country so that we can enslave Africans, so that we could take the land of the indigenous people, and so we could give the poor indigenous servants who couldn't vote the belief that they were white. And until we accept that, and so when I started listening to recommendations, I got this is where it's energizing me.
Great.
Because any of you know who William Barber is? And the Poor People's Campaign? And he has an interesting book. It's called White Poverty: How Exposing Myths About Race and Class Can Deconstruct American Democracy. Because the truth is, the largest group of poor people in this country are white. They're not black, they're not Hispanic, but we don't talk about that. And when we talk about this election, we need to look at the whole facts. The whole facts is that 20 million people who voted for Biden didn't vote. And the only reason we have Trump is because of those people who didn't vote, whether they're young, whether they're poor, whether they're ever. And how do we become a real nation if we don't tell the real truth about who we are?
Thank you. And I think something you named there's so many things, but racism as a tool to divide that harms white people and black people and Latino people. And so as the analysis of the election is happening, and that people who didn't vote's really, I'm so curious about that. And how do we find out more? I don't know how you find out more about those folks who aren't voting. But understanding the tools that are used to divide us, and that is a symptom of a desire to take wealth and power and hold wealth and power. And so how do we counter that is where we need to be spending time and energy thinking about. Yeah, we had one, there you go. Good, you hit on it. And this is probably last one.
I'll try to make this quick. I just want to talk about my imagination is enhanced when I hear stories. And storytelling, I think, is very important. And we can go to different communities and hear stories. And one of the things that I've done is gone to different churches and I'm a Buddhist, so I did this first at my Buddhist center, which is show the 1619 Project on Hulu. And I think that's, you don't have to say anything, you just let these people in this series talk about their lives and their stories. And then I want to say one thing is my story, and the reason this election was so important to me is because 7 years ago, I had a child, my first grandchild was born. And at the age of 2.5, 3, she said, "Daddy, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, and I've always been a girl." So I have a trans grandchild. And the way I've coped with it is to join a group of grandparents nationwide where they all have trans grandchildren, and we talk about it once a month or twice a month. And that's been very beneficial to me. It's kind of like a community of mine now. But also, I would like to tell the story someday of this little child born, a boy, who is now 7 and is very much a girl. And I don't know that many people know that anymore because she's so much a girl. Mm-hmm. But it's a story that if what I hear, like if you go to school, your child's going to come home trans, it's just not true. Mm-hmm. That all of us in our family had to adjust to this child. We had to learn where she was coming from and why. And we don't really even know that, but we have to accept her and love her. And there's a book that just come out called Grand Love, and that is about grandparents trying to love their not trying to love, but loving their trans children and figuring out how to be support to them in this very tough environment.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing the story and reminding us, that sharing stories and hearing stories is a part of that engaging and not checking out and staying in the space and being vulnerable enough to share your story. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming and engaging and being vulnerable and brave to speak. So thank you. Karen's coming to pull me off the podium, so thanks. Yeah.
For this absolutely wonderful facilitation and presentation and forcing everyone to think and not just react. And you also had an opportunity to emote and also be in community with other people to go through the same kind of struggle of sort of at least asking the questions over and over again in various ways and encountering case studies so that you know when you go out into your communities now, you know to ask the next question, the why question, or what makes you think this way, or what's happening in your life, what is your story? Because it is and I agree, it's in the narratives where we learn more about one another and we learn to accept one another. I am so excited that I got a chance to see all of your beautiful faces and experience your beautiful souls tonight. I want to remind you that we have food over there and we have containers. No, I mean for people that didn't eat anything, or because I know somebody told me they're fasting and they said, but I'm going to take something to go when I leave. And that's important. We want to make sure that people are fed in multiple ways. So please stop by and grab some food if you'd like to do that. And most importantly, we want you to be safe as you depart from this place. And we hope to see you again. Take good care.